At 49 years old, Tim Duncan is remembered as one of the most enduring and respected figures in NBA history. A man who constructed his entire career not through flashy attention or dramatic headlines, but through the quiet precision of discipline and ruthless efficiency. 5 NBA championships spanning 3 separate decades, 2 regular season MVP awards, 3 finals MVP trophies, 15 All-Star selections, 15 placements on the All-Defensive First Team, over 26,000 career points, thousands of rebounds and blocked shots. Those figures are more than numbers on paper. They stand as evidence of a quiet form of dominance that never needed to boast. Across 19 seasons in a San Antonio Spurs uniform, he never walked away from the franchise, never asked for special privileges, never placed his ego above the team. He became the cornerstone of one of the rare true dynasties in modern American sports. Tim Duncan was eventually inducted into the Hall of Fame, widely acknowledged by analysts and experts as the greatest power forward to ever play the game. He was the foundation that transformed a small market organization into a symbol of sustained excellence and disciplined culture. But when championships have been carefully archived in history's memory, when the roar of the crowd has long faded, what remains on a quiet morning in San Antonio and pure pride? It is the persistent, sullen ache of a body worn down by 2 decades of battle, and a spirit that never truly had the chance to rest. Knees worn by degeneration, a lower back that throbs with nearly every movement, long, sleepless nights because the body no longer responds the way it once did. These were the prices he never publicly complained about. And alongside that physical toll, there was another, more subtle pain, the emptiness of a man who dedicated his entire existence to others, to the system, to the team, so completely that when it all came to an end, he had to relearn how to live for himself. Tim Duncan did not crumble in the face of that emptiness. He tightened his jaw and accepted the hurt, the same way he once embraced every sacrifice on the court. Because his motivation was never about applause or legacy, it was about staying true to who he was. In that quiet, he remained upright, refusing to let pain make him bitter, refusing to allow isolation to chip away at his dignity. Because if his life taught him anything, it was this: some people do not live for applause, they live to fulfill their responsibility until the very end, even if the cost is a loneliness that stretches through the rest of their days. If you've ever respected the quiet greatness of Tim Duncan and want to discover the deeper story behind those championships, make sure to subscribe and continue this journey with us. When Tim Duncan stood before his mother's casket at just 14 years old, he was too young to fully understand death, yet sensitive enough to realize that a part of his world had collapsed and would never be rebuilt the same way again. The room that day wasn't filled with dramatic sobbing or cinematic tragedy. There was only the heavy scent of funeral flowers, pale light filtering through the room, and the still face of the woman who had been the emotional center of his life. His mother passed away from cancer, a disease that had slowly and quietly drained her strength over time. And when death finally arrived, it offered Tim Duncan no final warning he could brace himself for. Thought it wasn't an eruption of tears. It was a shock so deep it froze every feeling inside him. Tim stood there with his arms hanging at his sides, his eyes locked on the lid of the casket. And in that moment, for the first time, he absorbed a brutal truth. Some pain does not give you permission to cry, because if you do, you might completely break. No one rested a hand on his shoulder and told him, it's okay to cry. No one showed him how to confront loss. No one guided him through grief without shame. In that instant, Tim Duncan did not choose to scream. He chose silence. And that decision, what seemed like nothing more than the instinct of a confused, grieving boy, became the survival mechanism he would carry with him for the rest of his life. His mother wasn't simply the woman who gave him life. She was the only person in the family who consistently made Tim feel genuinely understood, not through dramatic speeches, but through a steady, quiet presence that never wavered. When she was gone, what remained wasn't just grief. It was an emptiness that reshaped the way Tim understood love, comfort, and even his permission to be vulnerable. After the funeral, the world continued forward as if nothing had shifted. School doors remained open, basketball practices carried on, adults immersed themselves in work, and Tim quickly realized that the world does not pause for the pain of one boy. In that indifferent continuation, he began swallowing his tears piece by piece, until holding them back felt more natural than letting them fall. He didn't speak about his mother, didn't question why she had to die, didn't allow himself to ask whether it was fair, because no one around him seemed prepared to hear those questions. Silence became his shield, the only protection he had against being consumed by the hurt. Years later, when he was an adult, people would praise Tim Duncan for his unusual calmness, for the way he remained steady under immense pressure. But few recognized that this calm wasn't something he was born with. It was shaped in a child who had been forced to mature too quickly while standing in front of his mother's coffin. From that day beside the casket, Tim Duncan learned to carry his feelings on his own, never opening up, never leaning on others, never looking outward for comfort. He grew up believing quietly that if he could be strong enough, disciplined enough, silent enough, then pain would never overpower him. But the harsh reality is that pain doesn't vanish, it sinks deeper, steadily molding a person from within. In the years that followed, whenever Tim encountered defeat, injury, or the overwhelming burden of expectations, he never unraveled, never protested, because he had already faced something far more devastating and endured it. Still, surviving came at a cost. Tim never truly learned how to heal. The loss of his mother was never processed, never spoken aloud, never placed where it belonged. It remained sealed inside him, quietly shaping every relationship and influencing every reaction he had to the world around him. While others sought out friends, family, or comforting words, Tim Duncan leaned into discipline. While others found release through tears, he found release by pushing himself to withstand even more. That's why later in life, even after climbing to heights most people only imagine, Tim never felt entirely complete, because the most essential part of him had stayed frozen at 14 years old, standing silently before his mother's coffin, teaching himself not to cry so he could survive. Her death didn't weaken Tim Duncan, it forged him into someone extraordinarily strong in the coldest, most isolated sense of the word, a strength built without comfort, without emotional release. And from that day forward, through every championship, every accolade, every ounce of reverence the sport could offer, one fact has remained unchanged. Tim Duncan has never truly healed from the moment that 14-year-old boy first learned to swallow his tears. After losing his mother, Tim Duncan wasn't given the space to drown in grief, because before he could even fully process what he had lost, he reached for something else, like grabbing onto a final life raft to avoid being pulled under, swimming, long before basketball ever entered his world. The water was where Tim felt secure. It was the rare place where his body could move freely while his mind remained still. In the saltwater of the Virgin Islands, Tim didn't have to talk, didn't have to explain himself, didn't have to endure sympathetic stares or heavy expectations. There was only the rhythm of breathing, the repetition of strokes, and the steady sensation of inching forward. The Olympic dream wasn't a childish fantasy built on vanity. It was a precise, disciplined goal constructed day after day through sweat and routine, almost as if by swimming far enough and hard enough, he could outpace the pain chasing him from behind. For Tim, swimming was more than competition. It was a sanctuary, the one place where he felt a sense of control in a world that had just taken his mother and suddenly felt frighteningly fragile. But then, just as his mother's passing had arrived, without warning, Hurricane Hugo tore through the Caribbean in 1989 and wiped away the very thing he had been holding onto. The only Olympic-sized pool on the island was ruined. Dark seawater rushed in, the facilities were reduced to debris, and with that destruction, Tim's Olympic dream collapsed quietly. There was no goodbye ceremony, no comforting words, no reassuring voice promising he would find another way. There was only the hard truth that the road he had committed to, believed in, and centered his future around had disappeared after a single storm. It was his first major loss outside his family, but to Tim, it felt no less devastating than losing his mother, because it deepened a realization already forming inside him that the things you cherish most can vanish without warning, without fairness, without explanation. Those two blows, losing his mother and losing his dream, came before he had the chance to truly grow up, before he understood the fragile line between hope and illusion. They carved a lasting insecurity into him. He didn't lash out. He didn't blame fate or nature. By then, he was already used to not asking why. Instead, Tim adapted by pulling further inward, convincing himself that if he didn't hold too tightly to anything, then when it disappeared, it would hurt less. Yet that same protective instinct made him guarded, with his feelings, with his ambitions, with the belief that anything in life could truly last. When the pull was gone, he no longer had a refuge from the memories of his mother, from the hollow house, from the heavy silence that wrapped around his teenagers. He had to search for another direction, not out of blazing passion, but because standing still meant being swallowed by loss. It was in that space that basketball entered his life, not as a grand new dream, but as a reluctant alternative, a door opening only after all the others had closed. Unlike swimming, where he once trusted the effort would produce clear rewards, basketball arrived surrounded by caution and doubt. He no longer allowed himself to dream boldly, no longer permitted his whole heart to attach to one path, because two painful losses had already taught him that loving deeply meant risking even deeper loss. Instead of imagining gold medals, Tim began imagining survival, simply not falling behind, simply enduring. The awareness that everything he cared about could disappear didn't turn him loudly pessimistic. It made him careful to the point of emotional distance, always holding himself slightly apart from joy and hope. Years later, when fans watched Tim Duncan play with an almost unreadable calm, very few understood that beneath the composure stood a boy who had absorbed one of life's harshest truths far too early. Never trust fully that anything will last forever. The Olympic dream that was swallowed by the sea did more than redirect his athletic future. It erased the final pieces of his innocence, pushing him prematurely into adulthood with a belief that both sustained him and quietly haunted him. The belief that anything beautiful, if loved too deeply, could vanish in a single instant. When basketball finally entered Tim Duncan's life, it didn't arrive as a promise, certainly not as some bright rescue after back-to-back losses. It felt more like a narrow opening that appeared only because every other option had disappeared. Tim came to basketball later than most kids, late enough that he had no childhood memories attached to the echo of a bouncing ball or early dreams of one day reaching the NBA, while others his age were already comfortable dribbling, shooting, and instinctively reading the floor. Tim was still struggling with fundamentals, awkward enough to blend into the background. His frame was tall and broad, yet he didn't fully know how to maneuver it within the tight confines of a court. His hands were long, but not polished enough to translate movement into points. No one paused for him to catch up. No one carved out special hours to mentor him. Because in sports, patience is usually saved for early phenoms. Tim Duncan wasn't a prodigy drawing attention. He wasn't a name that made coaches look twice. And he certainly wasn't standing in any spotlight. He was simply a tall, quiet teenager who had arrived late, carrying a fatigue that was difficult to define, as if he still wasn't convinced this road would remain steady. Those early practices were filled with a sense of displacement. Tim quickly realized that the soreness from drills was minor compared to the sting of being dismissed, labeled slow, instinctless, lacking what people like to call natural talent. But after all he had already endured, being overlooked was nothing new. He was familiar with not being chosen first, not being reassured, and he had stopped expecting either. Instead of protesting or pushing back, He relied on the only method he trusted: endure. When he made a mistake, he practiced it again. When he was knocked down, he stood back up. Every skeptical glance only pushed him further inward, sharpening his focus, as if by staying invisible, he could at least avoid being caught too soon. Tim Duncan didn't learn basketball through bursts of inspiration. He learned it through repetition, through the acceptance that he might never be the quickest, the flashiest, or the most celebrated. He began to treat his height not as a natural gift, but as a tool that required daily refinement. He taught himself to occupy the correct space, to conserve movement while maximizing efficiency, to execute simple fundamentals with such precision they could not be ignored. There were no roaring crowds during those years, no highlight plays that made teammates gasp. There were only long hours of practice, and the weight of exhaustion pressing down on shoulders that were already accustomed to carrying heavy things. During that stretch, Tim absorbed another harsh yet defining truth: if survival is the goal, don't wait for someone else to clear your path. No one was standing by, anticipating his development. No one was eager to invest in a lead rival with a fragile dream. To stay afloat, he had to persist alone, advance alone, fully aware that no red carpet would ever roll out in front of him. Basketball, much like the life he had been living since childhood, offered no guarantees of fairness. It simply made space for those stubborn enough to remain. Within that stubbornness, Tim Duncan formed an unusual bond with pain. He didn't dodge it. He didn't rebel against it. He accepted it as part of the cost of existing. He wasn't playing for affection, nor was he chasing applause. He played because quitting meant falling behind. It was proof to himself that after losing his mother and watching his Olympic dream dissolve, he could still stand upright before something new. Those late beginnings in basketball didn't deliver immediate glory, but they carved into him a cool, enduring philosophy. Don't wait for the spotlight. It rarely shines on those who arrive late. Learn instead to survive in the shadows, because in that darkness, with enough patience, you can build a strength that no one sees, and no one can take away. So when Tim Duncan walked onto the draft stage as the #1 overall pick, a moment that could have felt like the opening scene of a sports fairy tale, his reaction wasn't explosive joy. It was quiet acceptance, as though this was simply another stop along a long, familiar road of endurance.